by default, should we be stressed at this point in 2021?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question and an important one. And I think stress is inevitable. So I think it's a part of the package. If you're running a business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're doing B2B sales, stress is going to happen inevitably. We think on average 60,000 thoughts a day. We're aware of less than 1% of them. 80% of them are said to be negative. And so stress naturally happens. It's the function of the mind to stress. But what we can do is we can better handle the stress. So we can have, tips and tools to help us handle those thoughts when they come up if they're stress inducing.
So with that said, then, if this is almost a natural symptom of being alive, right, of just existing, how do we know when stress is becoming an issue? I know this is massively subjective, and I'm not necessarily talking about getting into the realms of depression or anything clinical here. I'm talking day-to-day sales business stress, just to keep us and myself on the kind of straight and narrow here of our conversation. Do people have a threshold? And then when the daily stress goes beyond that, they feel crap, but below that threshold, they feel fine? Or is it more of a grey area and a sliding scale as to people's stress level and their ability to cope with it?
Yeah, I think it really depends on each person. Each individual person handles stress differently. But the biggest a tip I can give is to be aware of our stress and when it's coming on. So you can do that by being aware of the thoughts that are going on in your mind. You can do that by being aware of how it's affecting your productivity at work. You can do that by even being aware of physical symptoms. Is your heart racing more often? Are your palms more sweaty? Do you wake up at night, with the heavy breathing? So there's different ways that you can evaluate how stress is affecting you. And when you notice it is, then you can use, certain tips and tools to help mitigate it.
Yeah, this is really gross. I never really pondered on this before. I don't know if I'm just stressed constantly, but I have sweaty palms all the time, Nina. I don't think I'm stressed all the time. But I appreciate what you're saying of moments of acute stress. So I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this ridiculous martial art, which is people rolling around on the floor, strangling each other in dressing gowns, basically. But I know that taught me something really valuable of just before a competition, when I'm just about to go and wrestle someone and probably lose, those thoughts, not necessarily thoughts of feelings, but those physical manifestations of sweaty palms, heart racing, I never really considered those stress. And it was only when I was put in those acute situations that then my brain tied that to stress day to day. And I thought maybe it was trying to convince myself otherwise. Maybe I was trying to convince myself that I was excited, or, I'd try and talk myself and use self-talk to avoid some of these stresses. But since training and competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's taught me what stress actually is and how to become more self-aware of it. For people who, for example, me 5 years ago, before I had these experiences, is there any other ways to tell and become more self-aware of our stress levels day to day? Is it, or let me put this another way, is this something that we should be checking in on throughout the day, or do we just deal with this when we get to like a big crunch point in our lives where things start to fall apart?
Yeah, you want to get to the point where you don't have to hit that crunch point. You want to be preventative about it. I'm an advocate and I teach mindfulness. So where I cope with stress is all up here in the mind. And the way that I position the mind is that we actually have two parts to our mind. One part is what I refer to as the chatty mind. Okay, it's the mind that is constantly going. A lot of people in this space refer to it as the monkey mind. It's going from branch to branch to branch, or thought to thought to thought. And this is the mind that we are so often in. We feel like, this encompasses who we are. But we actually have another part of our mind, which is so useful, which I refer to as the observing mind. And the observing mind just simply observes the chatty mind going on and on and on about all these thoughts and stressors. And the observing mind works like a muscle, right? So the more you lean into it, the more you're going to be able to leverage it. And so if once in a while we can lean into the observing mind, and it kind of sounds like this: oh, there you go stressing about work again. Oh, there you go, worried about that argument that you got into. When you can kind of observe what's happening in your mind, that's the moment where something's off and you can switch your internal dialogue. Because it doesn't take long. One of my mentors told me, it's just once you get into that fourth or fifth thought of thinking about the same thing, that's when you just start to spiral. So if you can catch it, because the chatty mind is going to think thoughts. That's not going to ever go away. That's just part of our makeup. Once you can catch it and kind of switch the internal dialogue, that's the most useful tool is just awareness of that chatty mind.
I'm gonna throw something at you now, and I want you to tell me if this is complete bullshit. Because
Okay.
I've seen science that suggests some of this, and I've seen a lot of science that says who the heck knows. So interesting for us, but unfortunate for the people who it affected. I'm not sure whether it was epilepsy or whatever it was, but there was a period of time when people who had, I think it was epilepsy, they did essentially brain experiments on these individuals. Terrible, shocking thing, but hopefully something good can come from it, and then we can study these individuals. And one of the things that they did was the two hemispheres of the brain, they separated them, and they did these experiments. One of which, I find this fascinating, one of which was they'd have a board literally in between the eyes of the individual, so that one eye and one hand is on one side and one eye and one hand is on the other side of this board. And they would ask the individual, hey, pick up your favorite fruit. And the individual would pick up a banana in one hand and an apple in the other, essentially different fruits or different toys or whatever it was. And you'd ask the individual, what's your favorite? And they would be convinced that whichever one side or the other was what they'd had in both hands. So then this was suggesting that the two separate sides of the brain are completely separate. And this is what leads to this, I guess is a theory, that you've got the chatty side of the brain, which has the speech and language processing parts of the brain built into it. The other part of the brain doesn't have, just the structure of it, does not have these speech and language like portions of them and the makeup of the cortex. And so could this be the case? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but we're almost like philosophizing about this. Could it be the case that the chatty side of the brain is literally one side of the brain, and then the other side of the brain doesn't have a voice, it doesn't have the vocal capacity to speak, but it's observing what's going on the other side of things? I know just throwing a lot at you there, but does that make sense?
It does make sense. I would say no, because if that person were asked to pick up, a fruit, and they had a choice and they made a choice in both decisions, and that means that that chatty mind is working. And the way I kind of see the observing mind is it's kind of, overarching any type of decision you make, and it's a witness more to that thinking mind, if that makes sense.